the land of Sereth had forgotten silence. For nearly a century the earth groaned with the weight of war. Every valley bore scorch marks or frostbite scars. Castles were razed in the morning and shattered by nightfall. The sky itself seemed divided, smoke and ash to the south, crystalline clouds to the north. The flame-born kings of the Ember Coast, whose bloodlines glowed with internal fire, battled endlessly with the frost-marked queens of the glacial highlands, whose veins shimmered with cold magic drawn from winter's breath. No treaty held. No ceasefire lasted. Even the rivers rebelled, running red in spring and freezing solid in midsummer. The land, once known for its healing waters and orchards kissed by mist, became a place mothers told stories of only to warn their children. But deep in the heart of the shattered realm, untouched by king or queen, stood the Temple of Stillness. It was old, so old even the oldest songs sang of it as a place already ancient. There the gods were said to listen. And there the priestesses listened in return, recording in whispered prayer what mortal rulers forgot, that blood was never silent. That death spoke and that if no one listened it began to scream. Elaith had been born on the threshold of the war's longest winter, during the siege of Durnwall. Her mother, too frail to flee the flames, gave birth beneath the old archways of the ruined city temple. The baby was found wrapped in ash-stained cloth by wandering monks, her eyes already open and unblinking, her breath steady as if she'd known from the first moment how long she would have to endure. Raised among silence, taught to read winds and omens before she was taught her own name, Elaith was not the most gifted of the temple students, but she was the most devoted. While others slept, she sat before unlit candles and waited for them to flicker. When others wept in despair, she went still and the tears ceased. When she turned 16, the Flame King of Asker shattered the northern fortresses with a blade pulled from the heart of a dying star. In response, the Frost Queen of Therial sealed the southern cities beneath a dome of glacial magic that withered every ember for 100 leagues. Crops failed. Refugees poured into the neutral zones, only to find famine and silence. The gods no longer answered the high priests. The dead were too many to burn, too restless to bury. The Council of Nine, once guardians of the sacred law, begged the Temple of Stillness to intervene. Not with swords. Not with armies. With offering. And so Elaith, now 18, was chosen. She did not cry. She did not bow. She walked barefoot through fields of ash and snow, past the ruins of temples long defiled, past the craters where dreams had burned and frozen and broken apart. At the center of Sereth, where the soil no longer held roots and even the ghosts kept their distance, rose the altar of surrender. It was older than the temple. Older than war. Older, some said, than the gods themselves. The altar was plain, a block of black stone, slick with the oil of centuries. No markings, no symbols. Only the silence of what came before everything else. There, before the gathered flames and frost, Elaith climbed the steps. The kings and queens, the armies held in trembling ceasefire by ancient law, watched from a distance. Even the sky dimmed. Elaith stood at the summit. She said nothing. She only knelt. Then she placed her hand on the stone. At first nothing happened. A stillness deeper than any breath passed over the land. Birds ceased mid-flight. Water stopped in its course. Leaves halted their fall. Even fire paused its flicker. Then the stone cracked beneath her palm. A single line split down its middle, blackness blooming into impossible shadow. From within the fracture came a sound no ear had ever heard, because it was not a sound at all, but a remembering. A remembering of every scream swallowed by pride, every plea ignored, every promise broken in the name of vengeance. It came in silence and in storm, in warmth and in chill, until all who watched fell to their knees weeping, not from sorrow but from recognition. Elaith's body jerked. Her back arched. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Only her eyes widened and they turned black, not like night, but like the void that comes before light is born. Then she collapsed. From horizon to horizon, the armies vanished. Spears turned to ash. Blades to dust. War banners unspooled into wind. The kings and queens, flame and frost alike, dropped to their knees. Some died. Others wandered into exile, lost and raving. No one ever saw the generals again. The war ended. Just like that. But peace came with a price. Elaith did not rise. The priestesses lifted her gently, her body warm and breathing but hollow. Her eyes remained open, black and bottomless. Her mouth moved sometimes as if forming words no one could hear. Her heartbeat was slow. Her soul, the high seer whispered, was no longer there. It had been given freely. She is a vessel now, the seer said. Empty but sacred. The people wept. Songs were written. Statues raised. The Temple of Stillness declared the dawn of the era of the quiet peace. Elaith was placed on a dais of woven cedar and frost glass, where pilgrims brought gifts daily: feathers, burnt herbs, sealed jars of memory. She was called the Veiled Flame, the Cold Sacrifice, the one who listened. But no one noticed, not at first, that the dais grew colder with each passing week. That sometimes her head turned, slightly, slowly, toward the east. That when the moon rose full, her lips moved again. As if she were listening. Or as if something else was listening through her. The war had ended so thoroughly that even its memory seemed to retreat into the soil. The people of Sereth began to live again. Fields that had once known only fire and ice began to sprout green. The rivers thawed and ran clear. Villages that had hidden in ravines and caves opened their doors and built marketplaces in the sun. For the first time in 3 generations, laughter returned to the land without echoing against the moans of the dying. The newborns were not given names of warriors or martyrs, but names of birds and blossoms. And above it all, high on the hill in the Temple of Stillness, Elaith wandered the stone halls like something half forgotten. She did not speak. She did not sleep. She did not eat, not in any way that could be measured. The priestesses left offerings beside her, which withered untouched. Some said she lived only on the breath of prayer. Others believed she had transcended such needs. The truth was simpler: she was present but absent. There but not. Eyes still black and deep as the void that took her, she moved with a kind of haunted grace, neither swift nor slow, never hurrying, never waiting. She touched no one. She answered no call. She passed like wind between the columns of the sacred courtyard and vanished like mist beyond the tapestry halls. People began to call her the Hollow Saint. The name took root quickly. Mothers whispered it when their children were born with clear eyes and quiet hearts. Scribes carved it into the new calendar stones, marking each year after the war as HS, not after her name but after her absence. Artists came from the Frostlands and the Flame Cities to sculpt her image in marble and bone glass. Some made her tall and still, like a figure watching over the world. Others carved her bent, with her head bowed and her arms extended as if offering something that could not be taken back. In one city, a sculptor was struck by divine frenzy and carved a likeness of her from the trunk of a petrified tree. When it was unveiled, the people wept, not because it was beautiful but because its face looked so lost. Elaith walked past that statue once and paused. For the briefest moment, her hand rose to touch the face. But she let it fall again and moved on. She did not remember her name. Not in the way she once had. She heard it often, sung in hymns, spoken in reverence, written in gold ink across the domes of reborn temples. But it rang hollow in her ears. It did not stir anything inside her. When children placed garlands in her path, she stepped through them without pause. When a young boy once reached up and offered her a bellflower, she stared at it for so long that the boy began to cry. She turned away. The flower fell to the ground and was crushed beneath her heel. Yet wherever she went, the world responded. Rain followed her to drought-stricken villages. Birds sang where she paused beneath trees. Once, a blind girl brushed Elaith's robes and began to describe colors she had never known. In another village, a woman kissed the ground after Elaith passed, and her dead husband's name returned to her dreams, whispering forgiveness. But none of these miracles reached Elaith's heart. She moved through them like smoke through latticework, untouched and untouching. The priestesses grew older, their faces lined and weathered, while she remained unchanged. Her eyes never blinked. One winter, a pilgrim from the northern ice-ward coast journeyed for 33 days on bleeding feet to reach her. He brought a box of carved wood, inside which were the ashes of every relative he had lost to the war. He asked her, weeping, to say something over them. Elaith stood before him. Her lips parted. No sound came. She closed the box gently, placed a hand over it, and the pilgrim fell to the floor in gratitude. He later claimed that in her silence, he had heard the last words of his brother, the final laugh of his mother, the lullaby his grandmother used to hum. But Elaith heard none of it. She only felt the emptiness echo, vast and unreachable, inside her chest. Seasons passed. Years. Temples began teaching children her story, the girl who gave her soul so the world could sing again. They recited her tale in every tongue. They built shrines along the mountain passes where travelers could leave silver coins and ask for safe passage. They carved her face into the lids of coffins, praying for peace beyond life. Still she wandered. Still she remembered nothing. The gods remained silent. The wind shifted, but never enough to stir her robes. Fire no longer feared frost. The balance held. But peace, like all things born of sacrifice, carried weight. And each night, as the moon rose and the bells in the upper spires chimed softly, Elaith would climb to the highest balcony of the Temple of Stillness. There, she would look out over the land she had saved and see only a horizon she could not name. One night, a novice found her there and dared to speak. "Lady Saint, do you remember who you were before the altar?" Elaith did not reply. But the novice swore she saw one tear slip from Elaith's eye and vanish before it reached her cheek. The 13th year of peace arrived with an edge that no one could name. The air turned colder, sharper, though it was midsummer. In the mountain villages, goats refused to graze near the old forest paths. In the northern frost-ward towns, birds flew in wrong patterns, spiraling down like leaves from trees long dead. The great temple gongs sounded slightly off-key, though their bells had not been touched. Children who had never seen war woke crying in the night, clutching their mouths, claiming they dreamed of screaming with no voice. In the high places, in the deep roots of Sereth, something was beginning to unravel. At first it was dismissed as superstition, relics of the war's long shadow. After all, peace had lasted longer than anyone expected. The priesthood assured the people that balance remained intact, that the hollow saints still walked among them, that all was well. But one by one signs grew harder to explain. The sacred animals of the lowlands fled the temple groves. The lantern lizards, once drawn to offerings of incense, vanished. On the third night of the new moon, a farmer in Calveth found blood pooled in the cracks of the temple steps, dark and cold as if it had been there forever. When the temple acolytes tried to cleanse it, the stone hissed and turned black. That evening the sun set behind a wall of red clouds, and for a moment the whole sky bled. Then silence. Not the kind Elaith walked in, but the kind that waits. Elaith stood at the cliff's edge, beyond the western reaches of the Temple of Stillness. She had come here for 13 nights in a row, though no one followed her or dared ask why. Her robes fluttered around her as if they, too, were seeking something lost. Below the cliff, the sea rolled sluggish and dark, its tide indifferent. The wind was thick with the scent of copper, and the stars above seemed bruised. She had not spoken in 13 years. Not once since her soul had been given. Not even to herself. But now she did. A whisper smaller than breath. Elaith. The sound of it did not echo, but the world heard it. The wind halted. The water stilled. Even the stars seemed to freeze in their orbits. Elaith blinked once. Something moved inside her. Not a thought, not quite a memory, but the trembling of a thread too long held in tension. Her fingers flexed. Her spine straightened. She closed her eyes, and behind the black veil of her lids she saw something stir. Below. Beneath the bones of the land and the root of all things. A door creaked open in the underworld, and something began to return. In the village of Dareth Hollow, an old woman fell to her knees and wept without knowing why. In a garden temple where no one had set foot since the final battle, the statues wept tears of stone. Children who'd been born after the war began drawing the same sigil over and over in dust and ash. A figure split in two, one half light, one half flame. The priesthood knew what it meant. But they said nothing. They remembered the price Elaith had paid, and they feared it might be called for again. Back at the cliff, Elaith turned away from the sea. Her face, long impassive, carried something like sorrow now. Not for the world but for herself. Because in that whisper, her name, something had been set loose. Not just her soul, but the part of her that had made the offering. The part that remembered the prayer. She walked through the silent paths of the temple as stars flickered like dying embers. Wherever she stepped, the torches went out. The shadows welcomed her. She passed murals of the Peace Pact without looking at them. Past tapestries woven in her honor. Past the echoing halls where people once knelt to her in awe. She passed through it all like a ghost re-entering her grave. In the shrine of her vigil, a mirror hung untouched since the day of her sacrifice. No one had dared let her see herself. But now she approached it. And looked. For the first time in 13 years, Elaith saw the face she had forgotten. Older now. Paler. But hers. Her lips parted again. Elaith. This time it was not a whisper. Not to the world. It was a summoning. To what had been left behind. Far beneath the world, where the gods kept the ledger of oaths and traded lives for quiet, a soul twisted in its cage. It had been still. Patient. Waiting. Now it opened its eyes. And began to climb. The temples had grown fat on peace. 13 years of unbroken harvests, 13 years of quiet skies and low-burning hearths. 13 years in which the high priests sat upon thrones of polished bonewood and spoke of harmony as though they'd built it themselves. Statues of Elaith, serene and open-palmed, stood in every city square. Offerings were left daily, milk, herbs, folded letters full of thanks, and the priesthood gathered them like taxes. But when the omens returned, when blood ran from stone and beasts fled the forests, none of the priests could look her in the eye. She came to them without ceremony. Her robes were threadbare, her feet bare, her presence colder than ice water. The high temple of Vel Saran had once been her home. Now it felt smaller than she remembered, weaker. The air within it bowed under the weight of something approaching. The head priest, Aun-Marath, stepped forward to meet her, smile firm and fake as wax. "Holy One," he said, voice pitched for others to hear. "You honor us." She did not speak. Her eyes, hollow and deep, moved slowly over the assembled council. She waited. A ripple passed through them, nervous glances, the tightening of hands, a murmur barely held. She reached into the folds of her robe and withdrew a small shard of obsidian, smooth on one side, jagged on the other. She held it up in silence. None of the priests moved. Then she turned and walked past them, down the forbidden stair beneath the altar. The one they had sealed after her sacrifice. No one dared stop her. The chamber beneath Vel Saran was once the center of the old rites. Here, generations ago, sacrifices were made, not to gods of light and sky but to something older, nameless, buried. The walls were carved with sigils now half erased by soot and ash. The air tasted like old teeth. No torch stayed lit. Elaith moved by memory she did not remember gaining. At the far end, behind a veil of iron chains and faded prayer cloth, she found it, a great seal of red-stained stone. At its center, a hollow socket. She pressed the obsidian shard into it. The ground shuddered. A creak of ancient pressure released, as though the world itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. The iron chains trembled, then fell still. And the whisper came. "You remembered?" The voice was not from her mind. It came from the stone, from the space beyond the wall, from the marrow of her bones. It sounded like her own voice, but older. Hungrier. Behind her, the priests had gathered at the edge of the stairwell. She turned to them. Aun-Marath stepped forward, paler now. His hands trembled. "There is no need to return to what was sealed," he said. "You must understand. We did what was needed. You chose peace." Her gaze silenced him. She stepped toward them, and each man flinched as if struck. She made no accusation aloud. She didn't need to, because she remembered. The scrolls had not been hard to find, not for one who walked the temple corridors like smoke. They had been hidden not in locked boxes but in plain view, disguised as ritual texts no one read anymore. Beneath their sacred poetry, beneath the liturgical flourishes, the truth had been scratched in red ink, careless, hurried. The war will not end. Only pause. The soul must be offered not to the gods but to the root beneath. Peace is bought in blood but its cost is time. She had not given her soul to the divine. She had sold it to a sleeping thing beneath the altar. A god older than gods. A root-deep hunger, patient and terrible. They had used her. Not as savior. But as seal. A sacrifice not to cleanse but to delay. 13 years the scrolls had said. 13 years of stillness. No more. After that, the pact must be renewed. But there was no one left to offer. Except the one who remembered her name. Elaith turned from the trembling priests and stepped back toward the seal. She no longer feared what was behind it. She had given up everything, her voice, her joy, her sense of self, for the promise of peace. And now she saw it clearly, the gods had not saved them. She had simply been made into a hinge between wars. A bone latch. A borrowed promise. And something wanted its payment. From beyond the seal, she heard it again. "You woke me, soul child. Come." Elaith touched the stone with both hands. And this time she answered. They noticed first in the village of Mern's Hollow, a place so small no map had marked it in a generation. An elder woman, rising before dawn to scrub the temple steps, saw the statue of Elaith glistening red in the light of her oil lamp. At first she thought it do. But then the copper scent filled her nose, sharp and unmistakable. Blood ran from the statue's eyes in two perfect streams, down her cheeks and onto her outstretched hands. The elder dropped her bucket and ran screaming. By midday, every statue in Sereth had begun to bleed. In the capital, where Elaith's likeness stood 3 stories tall in the Hall of Peace, the blood gushed so steadily the priests had to cordon off the chamber. They lit every blessed fire they knew, recited every calming rite, rang the bells of restraint until they cracked, but nothing stopped the flow. It filled the marble basin beneath her feet, and still it came. Soldiers stationed to guard the statue reported dreams of drowning in crimson tides, of waking with red-streaked faces and the sound of a woman's voice whispering their forgotten names. In the north, fires broke out without flame, entire houses reduced to ash overnight with no ember, no smoke trail, no spark. Fields burned in crescent shapes, and where the flames passed, crops blackened with frost in midsummer. Children pointed to empty air and said, "The Hollow Lady walks there," before returning to their games as if nothing had changed. And the dreams spread like fever. Across villages and cities alike, people woke breathless and shaking, murmuring of a woman standing in the light of dawn. Her hair moved though there was no wind. Her feet hovered just above the ground. Her eyes were deep hollows and yet not empty. Some said stars moved within them, others said fire. No one could remember what she said, only the weight of her gaze and the feeling that something vast and buried had stirred. They called her by a dozen names: the returned, the soul unbound, the dawn-marked, the Hollow Queen. But those who had known her in life knew there was only one name that mattered: Elaith. Far from the cities, in a valley the maps had forgotten, Elaith stood alone in the shrine of the unnamed. The shrine was little more than a ruin now, half-sunken stones, collapsed arches, vines thick with age. But its heart remained intact, a chamber carved into the base of a hill, hidden by a waterfall. Few remembered it had once been a place of vows older than the temple gods. Here, warriors who bore no banner left behind their swords when they were finished with war, or when war had finished with them. Elaith had found it not through map or memory but instinct. Inside the air was still. Dozens of blades, rusted and moss-covered, lined the stone walls. Some were short as daggers. Others taller than a man. One still dripped old blood though it had not been touched in decades. Elaith reached for a blade wrapped in spider silk and shadow. It pulsed as she touched it. Warm, not with heat but with memory. The old kind. She held it with both hands and felt the chill run up her arms, her neck, into the hollow behind her eyes. It was not her mother's blade. Not her people's. It had never known honor. But it knew truth. She took others too, 3 knives bound together with gold thread, a double-headed axe with words etched along its edge in a language no priest had ever spoken, a crescent sickle once used in sacrifice. She strapped them across her back and waist. Then she knelt, not in worship but in acknowledgement. "I am not peace," she said aloud. Her voice cracked, dry with disuse. "I was never peace." Her voice grew steadier. "I was payment. I was pause. I was put in a cage and called savior." She stood. "I am the soul you sold. And I have come to take it back." Outside the stars dimmed one by one. In the cities, every dreamer woke gasping. In the Hall of Peace the statue of Elaith cracked straight through the chest. And in the east, where the first light of dawn touched the hills, a woman with hollow eyes began to walk west, toward her name, her story, and her reckoning. Ash curled around Elaith's ankles as she stepped into the wasteland where the final battle had once raged. Though 13 years had passed, the land had never healed. Trees refused to grow here. Birds never flew overhead. The soil remained gray, scorched to its roots. Beneath the layers of dust and decay, something deeper pulsed. A memory, a rhythm, a low hum like breath caught in a throat. The bones still sang. Not with melody but with vibration, tiny pulses beneath the earth, a humming in her spine. As she walked, her foot struck a broken helm, half buried in cinders. The metal clinked against a jawbone, and for a moment, the ground rippled like a drum skin stretched over a corpse. Here was where the frost-marked queens had fallen, ringed in shattered banners. There, the blackened cleft where the flame-born kings were broken. The war had ended here. Or so they had said. Elaith kept walking. The sky above was bruised, half night, half dawn. She felt the pressure in the air shift as she neared the hill where she had stood so many years ago, arms raised, soul surrendered, voice silenced by divine contract. The altar was still there, though ruined, cracked down the center like a heart left too long untended. And waiting on the altar's remains was someone, no, something. She paused. The figure sat still, legs folded beneath her, hands resting gently on her knees. She wore a robe that shimmered in waves of gray and red, like dawn seen through smoke. Her hair was bound with bone pins. Her face. Elaith stopped breathing. It was her own. Not a statue. Not a dream. Her face exactly as it had been the moment before the pact. Eyes full, lips curved in quiet resolve, a flicker of fire behind them. But the being's eyes were not hollow like Elaith's. They were burning. "You took long enough," it said. Its voice was like flint on stone, scraping, cold, sharp with waiting. Elaith stepped forward. "You're me." The figure smiled. "I'm what was taken from you. I am the price paid. Your soul unwept, unburied. I waited here in ash and bone, while they sang peace in your name. Elaid's hand brushed the hilt of the shadow-wrapped blade at her hip. What do you want? The soul rose, slow and weightless. She circled Elaid like a wolf appraising prey. To be whole again. To stop being a ghost tethered to silence. They made a pact, remember? A soul for peace. Elaid narrowed her eyes. The war ended. The soul's laugh was like cracking ice. Did it? Or did it hide beneath gardens and lullabies? What peace needs blood to last 13 years and no more? The sky pulsed red for a moment. The soul turned her face upward and smiled. The seal breaks at dawn. Elaid clenched her fists. And what then? Then the world remembers what it buried, the soul said softly. Unless the pact is fulfilled. She turned to face Elaid fully, and now her robe seemed soaked in blood, the ash curling at her feet like smoke from a pyre. One more offering, she said. One more blood gift at sunrise. A body worthy of what was lost. Elaid stepped back. You want a life? No, the soul whispered. I want you. I want return. You left me behind to float between gods and ghosts while they built temples from your silence. But I never rested. I waited. Ash lifted around them in spirals. Beneath their feet, the bones vibrated louder. Something vast and ancient stirred. Elaid gritted her teeth. You are me. But I am not yours to command. You think so? The soul murmured, walking close enough that their foreheads nearly touched. You think you can walk away again? I carry the scream you never let out. The fire you buried. The vengeance they paid not to see. Elaid trembled. For a moment she felt her knees buckle, not in fear but recognition. This was the part of her that had burned, the part that had begged to be remembered and been left in the dark. She had wandered hollow for years, trying to feel peace, to become legend, to let the silence suffice. But it never had. I don't want war, she said. Then fulfill the pact, the soul hissed. Or it comes tenfold. Blood for blood. Fire for frost. Every scream buried will rise, and Sereth will remember what peace cost. The sky began to lighten. The soul stepped back onto the altar and opened her arms wide. Her voice no longer echoed, now it boomed, thunder wrapped in mourning. Dawn comes. Choose. Elaid looked at her hands. At the blade. At the land still singing with death. And then, at the horizon. Where the first light of morning touched the bones. The palace of Queen Ricinia rose like a shard of ice against the bleeding dawn. Its towers were frost-veined stone, its banners pale and tattered, its halls cold with the hush of long-deferred reckonings. Elaid walked its corridors in silence, her steps echoing across floors polished too smooth to show reflection. Every statue that had once stood in her image, silent saint, hollow savior, had been torn down here. There was no worship of her in the north. Only fear. And secrets. The guards let her pass. No one stopped her, not because they welcomed her, but because none dared be the one to stand between the hollow saint and the throne. Word of the statues that wept, of the fire without flame, of the soul that walked the ash, these had reached even here. Queen Ricinia had known Elaid would come. She had simply hoped the time would never arrive. But time, like truth, is a tide. And Elaid brought the flood. She entered the throne room as the last moonlight struck through its high glass. Ricinia waited alone, seated not on a throne but on a carved stone bench below it, queen not by power but posture. Her hair, once silver bright, was braided with tokens from the war, frostglass beads, bone charms, a rusted ring from a fallen enemy. Her crown rested beside her, untouched. Elaid, she said, voice even. You've come to bring dawn. Elaid stopped a dozen steps away. You knew. 13 years ago you knew what the priests were doing. You knew the soul would be taken not by gods, but bound beneath the altar. Ricinia did not flinch. Yes. Why? Elaid's voice was low, not angry, not pleading, just tired. You fought to end the war. You bled for it. I bled, Ricinia said. And I watched thousands burn. I saw frost turn to steam under firelight. I watched sisters drown in melting ice. There was no more blood we could afford to give. Peace required a cost no army could pay. So you gave me. Ricinia looked up now. Her eyes were hard but glistening. I told myself you were willing. I told myself it would not be forever. That the gods would keep you safe. I believed that. For a time. Elaid stepped forward. But you heard the warnings. You read the old texts. You knew it wasn't the gods who took my soul. I did. Elaid drew closer. And still you let them bury me in silence. Still you let them raise statues and call it peace. still you stayed silent. I did, Rosinia whispered. Moonlight faded. Shadows crept toward the throne. Elaid's voice cracked. You could have stopped it. You could have undone the pact. You had the truth and you said nothing. Rosinia stood. She was tall, proud still, her age a crown she wore as fiercely as any forged of iron. I said nothing because I feared it would start again. Because the world is a glass mirror and truth is a hammer. I could not bear to strike it. Not again. They stood, inches apart, neither drawing a weapon. But between them the air rippled with memory, old fields burning, altars crumbling, the sharp scent of first blood offered beneath starlight. You were not chosen Elave, Rosinia said. You were sacrificed. And I broke the oath I swore to protect all who wore the robes of peace. Elaith reached out, not to strike but to touch the queen's shoulder. And now my soul demands its price. Not vengeance. Not war. But truth. The kind that ends kingdoms if it must. The queen's knees buckled. She sank to the floor not from force but from weight, of guilt, of memory, of 13 years of silence cracking open inside her like thawed stone. Elave knelt beside her. Rosinia touched her own chest. It's not forgiveness I ask for. Only that when the reckoning comes, you tell them I tried to love peace. Even when I failed it. Elave nodded. They will know. The queen exhaled. And then her body arched once, sharp, sudden, as if something unseen pierced her. She fell sideways, moonlight catching in her open eyes. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. But it wasn't from a blade. It was from the truth. Elaith pressed 2 fingers to her forehead and closed the queen's eyes. Rosinia's final breath had carried no scream, no plea. Only 2 words, barely heard, etched in air like frost on glass. Curse. Salvation. And then the moon set. And the pact pulsed, waiting. The climb was harder this time. 13 years ago, Elaith had walked these same winding paths as a girl of 17, cloaked in white, heart trembling, flanked by chanting priests and followed by banners of both fire and frost. The world had held its breath, expecting salvation. They'd told her it would be a gift, that she would bring peace through grace. That the gods would cradle her gently as they took what was needed. Now no one sang. No one followed. No one dared meet her along the way. She climbed alone, her robes tattered, her hands scraped raw from the ruined stone and wind. The path was half swallowed by vines and ash. Where once flowers had bloomed, ceremonial, cultivated, symbols of fragile hope, now thorned weeds scratched at her ankles. The air was thicker here, not with smoke or storm, but with something far older breathing beneath the surface. Waiting. When she reached the summit, the altar stood as it had before, mostly. But now the stone was cracked. Fractures split the surface like a spiderweb of old pain, branching outward from the center where once she had lain. The symbols carved into its edges, those sacred glyphs for peace, unity, sacrifice, were worn smooth by time, but Elaith saw them all the same. She knew their meaning. Knew how little they had ever truly meant. Wind coiled around her. A thin, silver wind, sharp as a blade. The trees below bent, and even the clouds drifted aside, as if leaving space for something enormous to descend. The gods were watching. But they would not help her. She stepped forward and laid a hand on the altar. The stone was warm beneath her palm, pulsing faintly like breath. Like memory. Like a wound that had never stopped bleeding. I am here, she said aloud, not to the gods, not to the stone, but to the part of herself that had been left behind that day. Not hollow. Not lost. I know who I am. She closed her eyes and bit the inside of her cheek until her mouth filled with blood. Then, without hesitation, she drew a blade across her own palm and pressed it to the altar. The stones drank. They always had. But this time they trembled. A low groan rose from beneath the surface, deep and ancient, like the slow shifting of mountains. The earth cracked, fissures running outward like roots. The trees shook. Dust rose in spirals. In the distance, rivers reversed course. Birds flew in patterns too precise to be random. Every god in the sky turned their faces away, save one who watched with a silver eye, unmoving. And across from Elaith, stepping from nothing, came her soul. Not twisted now, not cruel. It bore her face still, but the face of a woman reborn, not from peace but from choice. Her soul wore no chains. Its eyes gleamed with the fury of survival and the quiet fire of truth. Elaith faced it. You asked for blood. I give you mine. Her soul said nothing. I broke no pact. But I fulfill it now, with will. With truth. With a name that was nearly taken. And she carved her name into the altar stone with her own bloodied finger. Not the name of the hollow saint. Not the name given by temple or court, but her true name. Elaith, child of war. Elaith, who chose peace and now chose herself. The moment the final letter was written, the sky turned. The blue bled into silver. Not light, not warmth. Something colder, more absolute. The stars vanished, and for a breathless second, the world was held in pure silence, deeper than death. Then the altar screamed. Not with sound but with memory. Visions flashed across the cracked stone. The burning of the frost cities, the thunder of flame chariots, the weeping queens, the dying kings, the mountain graves of children never born. Elaith held fast. Her hand, still bleeding, pressed into the stone like she could anchor herself in truth. And the altar broke. Split down the center, cleaving in two. A final breath exhaled from beneath it, one that had waited for too long. The gods did not descend. They only watched. Distant, terrible, reverent. Elaith fell to her knees. Her soul knelt beside her. Together they bowed not to the altar, not to the gods, not to the sky, but to the blood in the earth, the truth in the stone, and the pain that peace had tried to bury. Then both stood. And the soul stepped into Elaith's body, not forcefully, not to consume, but to return. The wind stopped. The sky cleared. The pact was fulfilled. But peace would never be the same. Dawn did not arrive in color. It came in a hush. The world, still reeling from the breaking of the altar, held its breath as the first light crested over the shattered stones. A pale line of sun breached the farthest edge of the horizon, cold and goldless, as if unsure whether it was safe to rise. The birds did not sing. The trees did not stir. The usual noise of waking earth gave way to reverence. Elaith stood between two halves of what once held her prison. The wound in her palm was still open. Blood had crusted beneath her fingernails. Her feet were bare, dusted with ash and frost. Her body ached, not with injury but with weight, with memory, with a thing long emptied that had now returned. Her soul stood across from her, visible still for this final moment. It did not speak. It had never needed to. But in its eyes, her eyes, there was no more accusation. No fury. No vengeance burning beneath the skin. There was something quieter now. Consent. Elaith reached out. The soul moved toward her, a mirror folding into flesh. Their hands met. One corporeal, one made of light that remembered pain. No fire burst. No divine choir sang. Instead, the union felt like drowning in a river she had forgotten she'd once belonged to. Cold. Then warm. Then deep, very deep. A falling inward and outward all at once, as if her chest had been a doorway all along. Her soul stepped into her. And Elaith did not shatter. She breathed. The moment the breath left her lips, a ripple moved across the land. Far to the north, a young soldier training with the fireguard dropped his sword and pressed a hand to his heart. The mark that had burned across his ribs since birth, the flame spiral, dimmed, then vanished. In the southern ice fields, an old woman knitting frost charms for her grandchildren felt the cold inside her bones begin to melt. Her blue-veined arms steadied. The mark of snow that had once curled around her throat like a serpent faded into skin. Across Sereth, in every corner where war had left its brand, those twisted marks passed down through generations like blood-inked scars. They went quiet. Not gone. But silent. As if soothed. None of them knew why. Only that something ancient had been closed. A gate sealed. A hunger finally fed. Elaith opened her eyes, blinking beneath the newborn light. It fell across the altar's remains, the dust still rising in pale columns, the air thick with the scent of iron and wildflower ash. She could feel her soul now, not separate, not whispering from beneath the earth, but seated deep in her chest like a second heart. It pulsed with memory and promise. It did not complete her, but it did remember her. The full shape of her sacrifice. And what had been taken. Elaith walked slowly to the edge of the cliff. From this high place, she could see the valley far below, the rivers winding like veins through the body of Sereth, the ruins of war banners fluttering from half-toppled towers. She raised a hand, not to wave, not to cast, not to command. Simply to feel the wind on her skin. Behind her, the altar was still broken. But in the crack where her blood had pooled, new green began to rise. Tiny shoots of something not yet named. Not peace. Not penance. Just growth. And the land exhaled. A deep, slow breath that passed through trees and rock and memory alike. Even the gods, far in their silver watchtowers, bowed their heads. Elaith did not weep. There were no tears left for what had been lost. No mourning left for what she had given. Only the steady pulse in her veins, the echo of a soul returned by choice, not force. When she descended the mountain, she did not descend as a saint. Not as a weapon. Not as the hollow, not as the flameborn's end, nor the frostborn's salvation. She descended as a lathe. And the earth, for the first time in an age, did not scream beneath her feet. Elaith vanished as the final breath of dawn passed over the altar. No sound marked her departure. No trace of her footsteps led down the mountain path. She was simply gone, as if the earth had taken her gently into itself, not as sacrifice but as something more sacred, something remembered. The altar where she had stood crumbled slowly in the growing light. The cracked stones no longer wept, no longer whispered, but they glowed faintly with warmth, the warmth of blood and promise. In the center of what remained, where her feet had last touched the ground, there formed a mark. Not burned or etched, but simply there, as if it had always waited beneath the dust. A red circle crossed by a single white line. A symbol with no words, no inscription, just a shape, aching with meaning. The people of Sereth came to that place in silence, climbing one by one or in small groups. Some left offerings, torn prayer ribbons, bone pendants, grains from their first harvests. Others brought their children, placing tiny hands upon the stone so they might remember the shape. None of them spoke while standing near it. None of them needed to. The mark became sacred. Not a wound, not a shrine, but a memory held in shape. Time passed. And yet the peace held. It was not a peace born of triumph or treaties. It did not roar with banners or parade with silver horns. It moved through the land like new roots, slow and silent. The old war marks never returned. Fields that had once fed armies grew wildflowers. Rivers that had run red with blood ran clear and full. Children born in the years after Elaid's right bore no trace of fire or frost, no binding of war, no inheritance of rage. They were told the story not as legend but as law. The Pact, they called it. The law written not in ink or decree, but in the shape of a woman's shadow at dawn. In the schools they taught the red circle with the white line as the first sigil. Children traced it in sand, wove it into cloth, carried it as pendants carved of bone. The teachers spoke of Elaith not as a queen or martyr, but as the saint who bled twice, once to stop the war and once to bind what should never have broken. First she gave herself, they said. Then she returned to reclaim herself. Stories shifted as they always do. Some said she became a flame that walks the forests at dusk. Others said her soul, now whole, scattered itself into the blood of newborns to guide the world quietly, unseen. Some said she went into the mountain and became its heart. Only one thing remained unchanged in every telling: the dawn. The moment she stood beneath it, flesh and soul bound in pact. The moment she gave a third offering, not blood, not name, not silence, but will. Villages began holding vigil on the morning of that same day each year. They called it Red Morn. They sang no songs. They lit no pyres. Instead, they stood in silence facing east, and when the first light came, they drew the mark in the earth with fingertips and closed their eyes. Peace, they understood then, was not stillness. Peace was the memory of what was given to prevent the unmaking. And Elaid's name passed from prayer to breath. Spoken not with pleading but with grounding. A name you placed in your mouth when you needed to remember who had once refused to be emptied, even when emptied. The priestess sold her soul for peace. The children were taught to whisper on red morn, each word like a stone set in place. But the soul came back for a blood pact at dawn.